Okay, next I'm delighted to introduce Iori Khuhro. Iori is pursuing a dual Master of Archival Studies and Library and Information Studies at the University of British Columbia. She has been a graduate research assistant for InterPARES Trust AI since January 2024, focusing on the relationships between AI, privacy, and archives. Iori is currently the Secretary of ACA at UBC, which is the student chapter of the Association of Canadian Archivists, and has developed an academic interest in EDI, critical and trauma-informed pedagogy within the archival profession and practices. Welcome, Iori.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. It is a privilege and an honor to be here with everyone at the symposium today. Okay, so this presentation, Where's the Balance? AI, Archives, and Privacy, was co-authored by myself, Iori, with Jim Suderman, Dr. Dara Hoffman, and Aaron Gilmore, who are from San Jose State University. And before I introduce our study, I just want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. So, Regis University recognizes that Indigenous peoples are the original stewards of the land we stand on today. I would like us all to respectfully acknowledge that this land is the traditional homeland and buffalo hunting grounds of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations. Please also take time to recognize the 48 tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. I am an uninvited guest, both here and on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, from where I have traveled to be here today. But as my supervisor, Dr. Hoffman, says, land acknowledged is not land given back. I don't have enough time on this stage to be as reflexive with my positionality as I would like to be, but as an archivist, I am cognizant of the fact that archives and archival practices have often been used to uphold a status quo that is underrepresented or harmed marginalized, especially Indigenous communities. It is with this understanding that I endeavor to not duplicate that harm within my research and future work. And I so urge you all to reflect on the lands on which you live and how your work impacts those people and their land. So, how are archival institutions protecting privacy in digital records containing PII when providing access to them? Well, generally speaking, they aren't. Providing access, that is. Archivists have historically taken on the role of a steward, sometimes trusted, sometimes not. In the early days, they were tasked with preserving the patriotic history of their nations, but quickly found themselves balancing the idealized nation against critical social memory. Archives have evolved to make space for both the old and the contemporary, for both the outdated and the new. A good archive is always in dialogue with itself. The archivist should constantly adapt based on those discussions. It is an archivist's responsibility to maintain an equilibrium between the records and the people in hopes of providing a public good. So, isn't access a public good? Why aren't archives providing access to the digital records then? It's not for a lack of trying. The unfortunate reality is, and for the risk of sounding like a broken record, that the digital backlog is so immense that archives physically cannot get around to manually protecting entire collections filled to the brim with personal identifiable information, just to make them accessible to some people. As a point of reference, the US National Archives is preserving almost 300 terabytes of White House emails, but, quote, none have been systematically opened by archivists for public access, nor is there any strategic plan for doing so in the immediate future, end quote. The increasingly complex and contentious nature of privacy may have swung the pendulum from access more so to privacy, especially from the standpoint of archivists having many tools and much experience in providing access to records, but with much fewer tools and experience when it comes to protecting privacy. However, in not providing access to those records to protect privacy, archivists are staying faithful to their work. Archivists, at their core, are stewards. Just as they balance history and the modern day, they must find a way to create an equilibrium between privacy and access. Balance in this context does not mean a one-to-one ratio, but rather an assessment of what action results in the least amount of harm. The PI Literature Review hoping for a solution that would assist archivists in mitigating their hindered access dilemma, put together an annotated bibliography that aggregated and recontextualized articles from the domains of archival studies, computer science studies, and legal studies, exploring the extent to which and how artificial intelligence tools and techniques could address or resolve privacy challenges faced by archival institutions. The literature we analyzed primarily answered our first 4 research questions. 1. How are archival institutions dealing with protecting privacy in digital records containing PII when providing access to them? 2. How could AI tools and techniques contribute to the challenges faced by archival institutions in providing access to those records? 3. What are the implications of using AI tools and techniques to deal with privacy issues in those records? And 4, how effectively can machine learning, natural language processing, and named entity recognition enable the identification and location of personal information in large digital textual collections? Based on our research questions, we began an iterative review of the literature. In screening for inclusion, we included date, peer review, type of publication, research setting, and research design. We started with searching for literature from 2017 and the subsequent years because we recognized the breakthroughs happening with AI in 2016. However, critical earlier publications specifically concerning privacy also found their place in our review because the privacy issues from before have not yet been resolved. Understanding that not all privacy, archival, or computer science work happens in peer-reviewed journal articles, we also expanded types of publication to include gray literature and white papers and reports. Both research setting and research design were inclusive. Throughout the course of our study, multiple graduate research assistants have graciously contributed to the annotated bibliography. They plotted out the objectives, research questions, core concepts, research setting, research design, key findings, and implications for each article. But not displayed in our annotated bibliography is how we also charted types of study, so whether it was archival, legal, or computer science, jurisdiction, so North American versus European privacy laws, privacy scopes, from very broad, such as private user data, to very specific types of personal data, like email addresses, messages, and headers, how the study dealt with privacy, what success measures they considered, whether human intervention was needed with regard to the AI model, and what novel model ideas we could use for future interrogation. We originally organized the articles under the 3 domains of concern: archival studies, computer science studies, and legal studies. The assumption at the time was that the division would facilitate identifying patterns within each field. However, we removed the categories because it became evident that the domains were not mutually exclusive, and that there was a more overarching issue at hand. Primarily, how do professionals define and apply privacy? The findings and discussions and conclusions found within the articles of this annotated bibliography were vast and diverse. They provided insights into privacy and AI conversations from around the world. We couldn't find anything else that did it the same way we did. The articles that have been aggregated and codified shatter the notion that each discipline is its own island. The archivists grapple with computer scientists, who grapple with the legal professionals, who grapple with the archivists. Despite the little attention they pay to one another, the findings of one discipline should have a great deal of impact on the other. Barron and Payne, Goldman and Pyatt, Yako, and Murphy and others lamented how access was being hindered because archival institutions had no other means of dealing with PII aside from manual redaction, which consumes more resources than archivists have available to them, namely time and labor. However, the plight of archivists is not unique to them. Barron, Boren and Barron, Diaz, McDonald's and others, Glacier and others, Ogeson and others, Temper and others, all write about the same limitation of having to protect PII through manual means, but from a legal context. However, It is primarily those in the legal studies who have investigated AI and machine learning as a means of overcoming those access issues. This demonstrated to us that archival studies remained introspective and considered the nature of sensitivity, context, and privacy within their collections. But the legal and computer science domains are already investigating and providing potential solutions to dealing with PII in more automated fashions. It is worth noting that while computer science studies are experimenting with machine learning, natural language processing, and named entity recognition to test the efficacy of these techniques when it comes to identifying, redacting, and anonymizing PII in their records, the computer scientists are primarily concerned with the unavailability of training data sets and their success measures for the field, including precision, recall, accuracy, and/or F1 scores, which may serve as adequate measures for determining how well an algorithm identifies true and false positives and negatives, but determining whether or not data is private and to whom access to data can be given continues to remain a weighted question on the archivist's shoulder. Lemieux and Warner explain, in their scoping review of privacy-enhancing techniques for archives, that despite experimentation with AI-enabled, primarily natural language processing-based approaches, effective ways to responsibly balance provision of access with protection of privacy remains elusive for archivists. This is largely due to the complexities of applying existing privacy approaches to large and often poorly described archival collections. The results of such approaches are insufficiently accurate, and even if accurate models are developed, current privacy solutions fall short of the scale needed for archival privacy management. Less human-dependent approaches, like neural networks, likewise lack the accuracy needed at this point in time. So, deploying privacy tools that are insufficiently accurate could erode trust in both the tools and the archival institutions that might use them. Despite the kinks in the technology, Barron and Payne contend that, quote, archivists can no longer rely on manual methods, end quote, because AI can filter sensitive data, allowing for quicker access to records online. Therefore, the relationship between privacy, archives, and AI is multidirectional. Simply relying on AI solutions to solve the problem of balancing privacy and access risked further entrenching known issues in both AI and archives. However, having perfected the balancing act of a steward, archivists must consider how applying archival knowledge and practices, such as rich description of provenance, can mitigate problems within AI. Because as Hentonen explains in Privacy as an Archival Problem and a Solution, the application of archival practices is critical for the protection of personal privacy now and in the future. Another potential approach to interpreting privacy relies on the theory of contextual integrity, which Nassenbaum uses to define privacy as a relative rather than a static concept. One's privacy is not always violated when a certain piece of information is shared, but rather when it is shared in an unexpected context or way. Hentonen suggests that since archival work is a secondary use of records, archives are inherently violating the privacy of those within the records, in which case strategies must be devised by archivists to address the ethical dilemma beyond burying the records. Moss and Gollins urge archivists to shift their focus from technical challenges of digital preservation, and instead they need to work on appraisal, sensitivity review, and access assisted or facilitated through AI and machine learning. The authors believe, quote, the archive has to take what it is given from the context in which the users have chosen to use it, end quote. It takes little thought to be critical of archivists. No one is more attuned to the fact that they need to be better at providing access to digital records than archives are themselves. Instead, we must understand that they have been stewards for centuries. Every decision is a compromise. Privacy and access are semantically at odds with each other, and archivists are constantly making judgments about what action results in the least amount of harm and the most public good. At the same time, the lack of action taken towards protecting PII in records is not solely an issue of insufficient resources, though the amount of manual labor and expertise that goes into redacting PII is profound, but rather a lack of strategic planning within archives to slow the steady growth of PII backlog in their collections. There needs to be a shift away from a purely compliance-based approach to a risk-based strategy that is cognizant of the fact that just because digital records with PII are inaccessible to the public does not mean that the personal information is still protected in that digital environment. Part of an archive strategy could involve a risk-based appraisal process, which leans on provenance as a means of determining sensitivity and privacy concerns within a collection. We look forward to learning more from recent and future interviews conducted with archivists, such as White and Walsh's recent work that provide an insight into the daily practices surrounding privacy protection, which have not yet been documented in the literature. The question upon synthesizing all of our literature is no longer whether AI can identify and then redact, anonymize, or pseudonymize PII, as it has already been proven to do so for recognizable named entities, but rather, can archivists, legal professionals, and computer scientists look beyond the existing attempts to define privacy and begin to develop sufficiently rich, applied understandings of privacy to support the development of robust privacy AI solutions that enable archivists to carry the ethical burden of having to judge when access takes precedence over privacy and when privacy takes precedence over access, responsibly and effectively. Thank you.